Look at these canvases. Observe the red-laced uniforms, the steel glinting in the harsh sun, and the snort of proud steeds. History books love this magnificent sight. They tell us glory has a fine scent, the smell of gunpowder and the aroma of pure ideals. But step deep behind the frame. Take a moment to scrape away the lacquer and the gold paint, and suddenly reality hits you in the face. Different smells rule there. The sour stench of starvation. The deadly miasma of cholera. The haunting silence of children wading through thick mud, looking at empty stalls, wondering where the last work animal went from the farm. Today, I won't speak of the strategic brilliance of generals. Not of grand maneuvers. Today, we speak of the dark price paid by those left behind in the villages, while the cannons roared on the horizon. The fire of revolution may fuel hope for a moment, but in reality, it often leaves nothing but ashes and broken lives. This is the word of fire. Today, we step into the shadow of glory. The Dream and the Mask. In the spring of 1848, the Hungarian sky seemed clearer and more hopeful than ever before. In the bustling cities and on the dusty edges of quiet small villages, a single word echoed through the air: freedom. But at that time, this word did not yet mean blood and sweat. Instead, it was a shimmering, heady, intoxicating political promise. Look at these faces at the recruiting tables. Young men, hardly more than children, standing in line with squared shoulders, wearing heavy boots inherited from their fathers. There is no fear in them, only that surging self-awareness felt only by those who believe they are writing history with their own hands and hearts. The pen is in their grip, and as they sign the enlistment papers, they feel they are not just signing a document, but sealing their own eternal and heroic glory. And the women, the mothers and the sweethearts. They stand in the doorways, waving their bright, colorful kerchiefs in the wind. There are tears in their eyes, but the kind that shimmer with pure and blinding hope. They believe their loved ones are heading into a glorious campaign, from which they will return home as champions, adorned with medals and flowers. The village folk form a guard of honor, the wine flows freely, and the pulsing rhythm of the Verbunko's dance makes everyone believe. Fate makes a righteous heart completely and utterly bulletproof. Let's pause for a moment and look at this young hussar. Let's examine his face closely. His skin is smooth, his gaze is clear. The fire of patriotism burns in his eyes, and the very moment he leaps onto his horse, he is the master of the future. This is the face that official memory wants to preserve for us forever. But now, let's look at that same face just a few months later. The same eyes, but the spark of intelligence has vanished from them. Only a dull, animalistic hunger and unfathomable exhaustion remain in its place. The smooth skin is now covered in cracked, dried mud and the toxic grayness of gunpowder. The proud posture is gone. His shoulders have slumped under the weight of a soaked cloak that has long since failed to protect him from the biting cold. This boy no longer dreams of freedom. He only longs for a single bite of dry bread, a morsel he might never receive. This is the moment where romance dies, and raw flesh and blood reality is born. The sons of the nation set out as heroes, but their fate led into a dark, silent, and hungry shadow, the slow destruction of the people at home and of human dignity itself. Legalized robbery, when the hero knocks. War does not only consume blood, it devours wheat as well. And it consumes it in staggering, almost unimaginable amounts. An army is like a vast, bottomless stomach that can never be truly satisfied, no matter how much it takes. By the autumn of 1848, the Hungarian army had grown immense, and this giant machine was starving for sustenance. But the once glorious military treasury was completely empty, and the paper money, the Kossuth banknotes, often seemed like nothing more than worthless, colored scraps of paper in the eyes of the skeptical villagers. This was when the word every farmer dreaded above all others became a grim reality: requisition. Imagine the scene. We are in a remote little village, far away from the thundering front lines. The sound of the church bell no longer marks a community event, but signals approaching danger. At the end of the road, a troop of hussars appears. But these are no longer the gallant young men who set out with songs in the spring. Their uniforms are faded, their horses' ribs are showing, and there is a strange, troubled look in their eyes. It is not the enemy approaching from across the border. It is their own. The very boys whose survival the village had prayed for every single night. But they have not come to liberate, they have come to seize what little is left. The officer pulls out a stamped paper, the law, and declares a requisition. This word is but a cold bureaucratic alias for what can only be called legalized robbery in its purest form. The soldiers enter the granary and seize even the very last sack of seed grain. They lead the cow out of the stable, the cow that was the only remaining source of nourishment for the children. And this is where the gravest social fracture occurs. The peasant, who in the spring proudly sent his son to the army, now grasps his scythe with trembling hands to defend his family's life against his own soldiers. Look at the soldier's face as he carries out the order. He sees the weeping woman. He sees the desperate farmer kissing his boots for just a handful of flour. The soldier knows, if he does not confiscate the grain, his comrades will starve in the trenches. But if he takes it, this family will not live to see the coming spring. This is the true face of war, when the interests of the state and the instinct for individual survival clash violently. Here, there are no longer heroes and villains. There are only hungry people at both ends of the rifle. The hussar, who once chased high ideals, now feels like a common looter in his own homeland. And this psychological wound is much deeper and more permanent than any scar a sword could ever leave behind. The invisible reaper, cholera. But there existed an enemy against which both the sword and the cannon proved utterly powerless. A conqueror that wore no uniform and blew no trumpet to signal its deadly arrival. Cholera. The masses crowded together on the battlefields, the spoiled food supplies, and the contaminated water sources all prepared the way for the epidemic. But the pathogen did not remain confined within the camp walls. On the wagons carrying the wounded, with soldiers on leave, and among the internal refugees, the disease seeped into every single Hungarian household across the land without a sound. This was the true existential nightmare for those left behind. Where food had run out due to requisitions, the body's natural lines of defense also collapsed entirely. Cholera did not choose sides based on ideologies. It took the soldier, the farmer, the mother, and even the infant lying in the cradle. It often happened that by the time a soldier returned home from the front, he found no life left in his house. Only an empty yard and the fresh, unmarked mass graves at the edge of the village under the gray sky of winter. History books produce cold statistics, 100,000 victims. But we must see the brutal biological reality, the woman trying all alone to scrape her dead into the frozen earth, because every able-bodied man in the village is either at the front or already lying cold beneath the ground himself. Cholera was the silent and ruthless conclusion of the War for Independence, which finally abolished all distinction between glory and abject misery forever. The silent hinterland, women in the storm. If you had walked down the main street of a Hungarian settlement in the winter of 1849, silence would have been your loudest and most haunting experience. This silence was not a state of peace or tranquility. It was the heavy, oppressive muteness of total and utter physical and mental exhaustion. The able-bodied men were far away on distant battlefields. At the handles of the plows, only 12-year-old boys and old men with bent backs remained to toil in the fields. But above all, the women. Those women of whom official chronicles hardly ever make a mention, even though they represented the true economic and moral backbone of the nation. They had to perform the work of several people without proper calorie intake, without draft animals, since the army had seized those as well, and often doing so without any rational hope or light to hold on to in the darkness. Look at these hands. They are cracked, wounded by the biting frost and by years of exhausting forced physical labor. These hands kept the biological future alive, while the social present was crumbling into dust all around them. These women no longer dreamed of lofty ideologies or grand speeches. They only watched the horizon for when another troop of hungry soldiers would appear, or even worse, the lone messenger bringing the terrible news of death. The hinterland was not a battlefield, but the scene of slow and agonizing economic erosion. Trade simply ceased to exist entirely. The currency became worthless overnight. People were forced back to an archaic, primitive level, barter, hidden supplies, and the deep suspicion born of the survival instinct. He who hid a handful of flour stayed alive. He who shared it with a neighbor risked certain destruction for his own children. Warfare consumed the very fabric of society. Trust and community solidarity all burned away in the fires of war. Only raw existence remained. At night, sitting in unheated rooms, the women listened to the distant thunder of artillery and asked themselves the question that no one dared to say out loud. Is this truly what we wanted? This is the tragedy of the hinterland. While the soldier at the front sacrificed himself for political honor, at home, the mother fought for basic dignity every single day, trying to create food out of nothing. In this silent war, there are no medals or decorations. Only survival remained as the only measurable victory left to them. Ashes and diamonds. History books love round numbers and clean statistics. They favor dates, victory reports, and the names of famous heroes. They do this because statistics feel no pain, and they leave no room for tears. Maps do not know suffering, they only show lines and borders. But today, we have seen the real and devastating price. We saw the young soldier whose fragile political illusions were washed away by the cold mud on his face. We heard the haunting social silence in empty barren pantries, and we saw the invisible destruction of the epidemic as it swept through the land. We came to know the brutal realism that bled silently behind the polished lacquer of glorious paintings. What then is the objective truth? That the revolution was a tragic mistake? That civil liberties are not worth even a single starving generation of innocent people? History is a cruel and indifferent logical machine. Great ideologies always have a dark, functional hinterland that sustains them. The fire of freedom never burns only tyranny. It mercilessly consumes innocence, security, and the small precious achievements of everyday existence as well. But something exists that even logistical collapse, disease, and hunger could not completely eradicate: raw human integrity. The mother who passed on the very last bite to her child, the soldier who shared his meager supplies, and the community that was capable of reconstruction even upon the smoking ruins of their lives. The concept of a hero is not limited to grand sacrifice on the battlefield. A hero is one who endures structural loss, poverty, and destruction, yet preserves their inner human quality even when the entire world is turned upside down and shattered. Next time you stand before a monument, do not look only at the steel. Think of the silent hinterland. Think of those who received no marble, no medals, only an unmarked grave and the forgetfulness of posterity. Because real history is not written on the front lines, but where glory and sheer misery meet. Thank you for taking the time to stay with me today. If you are ready for the next adventure, please subscribe, activate the bell icon, and invite your brothers and sisters to join us as well. The fire burns not only for you, but also for those who still walk in the deep darkness, and to whom only your courage can bring the flickering light of hope.